nostalgia that you should be shamed for listening to the Beatles once in a while. I think when we talk about aesthetic nostalgia, we're talking about a specific attempt or culture, as INFOSLIDE states, a common practice that surrounds reviving old material and like trying to like relate to the past, right? So like recreating what people used to like in the past, right? And I don't think we're going to argue that all material that references the past is like just necessarily shit. But I think I just want to say that when you start off trying to recreate something, when you start off with your very intention of trying to evoke aesthetic nostalgia, that's when you lead to objectively terrible products, right? It's what we want to avoid underside objects, right? So like to be very clear what I mean, I'm going to talk about something that I actually know. I'm going to talk about Star Wars, right? So like Star Wars was massively popular. They like, was able to and because people want to capitalize on the popularity of Star Wars with the prequels and the sequels and whatnot. I think that's where aesthetic nostalgia show why it's so terrible and shows how it damages series, right? So like when we look at the sequels, like for example episode 7, what we saw was that because they were so desperate to try to evoke feelings of nostalgia in people, they basically just recreated A New Hope. It was like pretty much exactly the same like product, except they were like different actors and like female lead this time, right? I think the point is that when you try so hard, try to evoke aesthetic nostalgia, that's when you really kind of fail because your product ends up being boring and stale and not really what people are looking for. Sure, perhaps like evoking nostalgia is some of a legitimate feeling for people, but we think that in general, when you go in with the intention of trying to evoke nostalgia, you often fail because the product is never as good as what you remember before. And this is why we think that when it comes to like things like the Star Wars prequels, right, where they were like less, when they tried to move away from like the original series, when they tried to do something that was slightly different and not so focused on like evoking nostalgia. That's why we think that we actually have more memorable stories, right? People are more likely to remember like this like the changes to the canon that happened in the prequels than the same-ish things that are happening in the sequels right now, right? I think the point is also wants to avoid like very like joyless remakes that only try to evoke nostalgia, that don't try to do anything new because there's no fear of like violating the canon. Things like King Kong, Total Recall, they all like new movies, all kind of stuff, right? Which you want like you all want to avoid. Now, and like I'm only really good at movies, so I'm only going to talk about movies. But I think this applies to like all forms of art, music, film, and like music and like paintings and whatnot, right? So first thing I'm going to talk about is why we think that like art is likely to be worse under aesthetic nostalgia, which is why we regret the motion as a whole, right? I think that objectively, like a culture of aesthetic nostalgia that attempts to recreate the past places a leash on the ability of artists to create something new, right? I think that because you can't violate the canon, because you can't go past what is seen as like necessary to the art form, right? For example, if like you create a Star Wars movie, you have to have certain elements within the Star Wars movie. I think that number one, like I just straight back, right? I think number one, it just creates a more boring film. Like insofar as you've seen it before, like when you try and repeat it over and over again, even though there's slightly something new, like most of the time people are going to be like, I've seen this before, why do I care? Secondly, I think like number one is like secondly it's just probably worse than the original, right? Like we're trying to capture lightning in a bottle again. Most likely you're not going to be able to do it. And when people see it, even though they may feel some sense of nostalgia, I think the following feeling that hey, this wasn't as good as the thing before. Why are they trying to make it? Is another feeling we want people to avoid. Because in general, we think that trying to capture nostalgia is very unlikely to happen, and therefore like, you just shouldn't try and go with the intention of doing it, right? We think that very often products that don't attempt to do this often are able to capture nostalgia instead, because while it may not try to actively reflect the product, like the same feelings that you get, the same feelings you get from enjoying that medium that is now like evolved into something new can also be like the same enjoyment you feel when you see something that makes you feel nostalgic. I think finally you're just limiting the ability of creative artists to create something new, right? Because even if you want to break out, even if you don't buy into aesthetic nostalgia, because aesthetic nostalgia has become a common practice, that means that you're less able to obtain things like funding to create what you are, like to create the product that you actually want to create and to create something new for people to enjoy, right? Because like the corporate world is so obsessed over aesthetic nostalgia, they're not willing to take a risk or fund anything new because they think that hey, this is too risky, there's no point in doing it, right? I think the point is that like art is only really important insofar as it can reflect the current expressions and feelings of the artist as well as like what matters at the point in time, right? Like how people felt in that period of time. And I think that insofar as you're trying to always lock yourself to a specific medium, like of aesthetic nostalgia, of always trying to follow like the exact same things that happened in the past, always trying to emulate that art and stay to the canon, that's when you're unable to truly reflect what matters most to the people, and truly unable to reflect like the true purpose of art, which is to relate to other people, insofar as you're trying to evoke the past, right? So yes, maybe you can find some meaning in nostalgia. We're going to argue that insofar as you try to find nostalgia yourself, try to evoke these feelings, like intentionally, you are less likely to be able to do so, likely create something that's very boring and like create something that's like just a terrible product, right? I think secondly, I want to talk about stereotypes. Can I move on any theories? None? Okay, cool. We're going to talk about stereotypes now. Now, I think this works in film, music, and whatnot, right? Because I think that a lot of stereotypes have been propagated by past music and past film, and that's led to damage the current art that we see today, right? For example, right, there's a lot of common movie tropes that like people feel that are obligated to continue to like create, right? For example, like black people always have to die at the start of the movie, and like just like in general, like a lot of changes have been, or like more importantly, right, like changes that have been made to the movie. For example, like like trying to like follow the past of the movie. For example, the main character of this series, even if you try to remake it, has to be white because in the past this character was also white. white. I think that means that, like in general, disenfranchised groups are less able to see representation insofar as they try to follow aesthetic nostalgia, because they're trying to reference things from a time where these people had less representation, where these people had less power, and therefore they're less able to like see like new representation, see new opportunities currently, right? Now, what they might tell us is that but you can reinterpret these new like mediums to contain minority actors. For example, they can say Star Wars star is a woman and a black person. But I think the point is, right, that like I don't think that this form of art inspired trying to evoke the past is as representative as you would like it to be. Because even though you like change the character and the skin color of these people, at the end of the day you're still following a story that was very much based around a white person's like story and life, right, around his experiences. And it means you're less likely to get meaningful art coming out that can actually represent these people. And in general, because people like to follow the canon so much, you may not even get this like color palette swap, right? You might get just like the same white actors getting opportunities, while other people with less culture don't get represented in the same way because of the past, right? I think what we're trying to say here is that outside wants to benefit people who didn't see representation in the past, right? People like Asian Americans, people like Hispanics, who didn't see that much representation in Hollywood, right? So right now, if they go into the acting world, or they try to create any form of media, right, even music, right, they don't find a place for them because people see that what they're doing isn't as valuable because it doesn't reference the past. And this means that these are the type of people that truly get left out under the outside insofar as they try to evoke the past at all times because the past doesn't include these people. And insofar as art can't represent the people that we see today, I think this applies across our entire case, right? Our entire case is the idea that art should represent people and art should represent people and like the current situation. And insofar as we see that number one, like people just don't create better art because they are leashed to like the canon of like terrible movies or like things that happened in the past, or like just like the way you would process like go about creating this art. I think number one, it just places a leash on creative people. And more importantly, because we told you about minorities as well, about people who don't see representation, about people who are just more likely to be just left out under the outside insofar as just trying to recreate the past and like once in a while turning towards palette swaps. I think that means that outside the side that truly creates the best form of art. Now why is this important, right? Because I think that look at the outside, what do we actually give up? I think we give up like some references to the past, some attempt to recapture nostalgia. But I think we're going to argue that sure, maybe we lose out on that, but I think if we can create better art that's better representative of people and better representative of people who are disenfranchised in the past, that's when art becomes truly meaningful, is able to empower people, and in general just creates a better form of art for everyone to enjoy. Therefore, please stand for OG.
Thank you for that speech, and now welcome to your proposition.
Woo!
Live stream.
Live stream.
Recorded.
I'm afraid the worst has indeed come to pass. I thought we could avoid the example trading in the hopes that we could actually get some structural analysis, but it appears we're going to have to do the example trading anyway because they've used Star Wars as the basis, or as a substitute rather, for actual analysis. Let's deal with some isolated rebuttals and try to force a comparative on them because they're done. And then we're going to go into arguments and then a broader frame by which we evaluate this debate. The primary arguments are twofold. The first of which is that revivals or remakes or sequels are generally shite, using, I think, as far as I know, the solitary example of Star Wars and how Episode 7 is shite. I'm like, look, yes, probably is, frankly, but they also created Rogue One. That's pretty good. Like, are we going to just like continue doing like example trading and that is the basis for which you have the opening government's case? Clearly not. If you decided to make movie adaptations of like ABBA soundtracks like Mamma Mia, for example, like those are pretty legitimate, like throwbacks to like a time past where we had different styles of artwork, different styles of music. Those were not necessarily bad things. If you wanted to talk about remakes and sequels, Wonder Woman being set first in World War I era like Britain, and then in 1980s like setting, sounds pretty legitimate to me, pretty popular too. Or like remakes of Batman with the Dark Knight series, or like Deadpool and Joker, which are after all comic book adaptations of characters created decades ago. What the fuck is wrong with these adaptations? Like, pardon my French, like these are not necessarily bad things. And frankly, the burden I see is, if it's not certain whether remakes or sequels or any attempts at like creating like aesthetic nostalgia are bad, then we shouldn't regret it, right? If the outcomes are at best mixed, I don't see why we should regret it, because then like it is subjective as to how you would want to use the base of prior artwork and prior music that we have created to fuel future like artistic inventions. Sometimes they turn out great, sometimes they don't turn out great. That's the nature of art. I don't see why we should regret it. The contrast, however, is very uncertain on their side. I don't know what the comparative looks like in a world in which we didn't resort to aesthetic nostalgia. Like, first of all, I really don't know how artists pull out ideas out of thin air, right? And so I struggle to imagine a world in which you didn't resort to aesthetic nostalgia. The Mandalorian, for example, which is a Star Wars offshoot, is basically paying homage to serialized westerns in which you don't have a plot that is being driven episode by episode. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Many successful TV franchises rely on their very same premise. Honestly speaking, the best example I could think of was maybe Adish Kapoor and his hyper weird sculptures that you put in Chicago or other areas. Yeah, sometimes they are popular, but sometimes they're also very strange because they're divorced from reality and the familiarity of prior visual art that we are accustomed to. Where Marshall, I don't know the dude who created the Golden Toilet, but these are sorts of things that, yeah, sure, might be very popular in their own circles, but they are things that we generally don't empathize with because they're very divorced from our reality or our familiarity with prior versions of art. So I don't see whether the counterfactual is necessarily better on their side. 3 arguments. First, the value or the inherent value of aesthetic nostalgia. Secondly, on how aesthetic nostalgia serves as inspiration for future generations and movements in art. Last but not least, on how even in the worst case scenario in which you say art is unrepresentative or imperialistic, we see aesthetic nostalgia can be a means of triggering a reaction, and you need that nostalgia in order to establish the relevance of that reaction in first place. Inherent value. To the extent that you care about diversity or just aesthetic innovation in general, many of the so-called popular or innovative films that we see these days, especially animated films like Coco, which talks about the Mexican tradition of Dia de Muertos, the Day of the Dead, all of these things deliberately use aesthetic nostalgia in order to evoke a time in which we felt good about ourselves, we felt good about our past, we felt a sense of community or a sense of shared belonging to the things that were being depicted on screen. And those are ways in which you create increased diversity because you tap on the familiar to address unfamiliar subjects, right? So that people in Asia, people in America who are not Mexican by tradition, you can access this facet of culture and allows us to understand the diversity of other people's experiences through tapping on the past. Or if you're talking of, for example, 1960s music of the hippie era, I guess, these are ways in which you can tap on values or aesthetic traditions in the past and allow us to innovate upon these things and create inspiration for new things. Or even if there wasn't any inspiration to create new things and we just deliberately use the past for its own sake, there's value in that too. Value in revisiting the history of the eras in which these things were created. A revival Queen era, Beatles era music. The music was objectively good. There is no reason why we shouldn't revive it, and it's not the current context implies that these things will dominate popular culture anyway, which is why they are often painted as exceptions to the norm. Bruno Mars is often painted as someone who carries on the MJ tradition or jazz tradition, and he is not all popular though he is the shining beacon of what popular music looks like. I think that belongs to Lady Gaga and Taylor Swift, and Bruno Mars, as good as he is, will never occupy that particular part of artistic tradition. The second thing I want to talk about is about how inspiration, art, aesthetic nostalgia is a platform for more inspiration, right? Every successive generation of visual art relies on the traditions that have been built prior. You've got hyper-realistic paintings 200 years ago, only to create impressionistic paintings with Claude Monet and the like, and then a further abstractifying of art with the Cubic movement or the Pointillist movement with people like Picasso. And you build, you innovate upon previous traditions. But you cannot innovate upon it without resorting to nostalgia every once in a while, precisely because you need to show what artistic influences you rely on and how you innovate from these things and differentiate yourself. So it allows you simultaneously to tap on things that are familiar, that create a sense of continuity, that give your artwork a sense of historical meaning, while at the same time ensuring, of course, that you are new and that people will therefore take you seriously. Cool. The last thing I want to talk about is about how art serves as a reaction. So I suppose the best case scenario they can come up with regard to how we don't have diversities, we don't teach enough local literature, we don't have Wole Soyinka publishing more Nigerian plays that the world can appreciate because we're too busy with Greek tragedies and Shakespearean plays. To which my response, or colonial era writings, to which my response is very simple. We need these things in order to show the contrast between outdated opinions or outdated representations of society in the past and what currently people from the developing world can create as a reaction to these things. And this means that we borrow aesthetic nostalgia in order to advance our aesthetic traditions. So, in conclusion, what I would say is, A, if it's unclear as to what the impacts are one way or the other, and that's the worst case scenario, there is no reason to regret it because variation in the impacts and outcomes of artwork is something that is quite normal in art. But more importantly, the site that provides you with the widest base of prior artwork to build your future artistic traditions on is one that results in the most diversity and innovation, and that's why you should go for opening up.
That's the uniform position, and now we're welcome to Prime Minister. Thank you.
problem with opposition today is that the vast majority of the case is largely uncomparative, right? They tell you things about how, in general, aesthetic nostalgia has created better art without caring for the comparatives that Joshua pushed out in his speech, right? Because it's not just about Star Wars, right? It's about how this is literally like containing entire artistic industries, right? So we're going to do like three things in this speech, right? Firstly, we're going to clarify what exactly aesthetic nostalgia is like, what it looks like in the real world. Secondly, we're going to talk about what the purpose of art is in general and why any form of aesthetic nostalgia just generally doesn't fulfill it. And then lastly, we're going to talk about how this generally destroys artistic industries as a whole, right? So firstly, what exactly does aesthetic nostalgia look like, right? We think that oftentimes this is a very tempting option for most artistic industries to default to, because when you're tapping on old shared memories, you don't have to build a new fan base, you don't have to build a completely new world or universe in which the storyline operates. But why we think this is problematic is because it leads to a constant creation of art that follows old tropes, old storylines, and general old plots, right? We think that oftentimes it takes place in the same frame in which old art was created. This generally creates worse art that just doesn't create the kind of appreciation that the creator of the art wants to generate, right? More importantly, right, we think that given all called us out for not having a comparative, but I think the comparative was there all along, right? We think that a comparative is one in which we stop prioritizing things like retro music or dressing like you're in the 70s. We stop prioritizing things like people making new Batman movies every 5 years, right? We're prioritizing things in which people are trying to break through completely new artistic mediums and forms, right? This includes things like creating totally new art that is suitable for today's 21st century context rather than something that took place in the 1990s, right? So second clash, right? What exactly is the purpose of art in general, and why does aesthetic nostalgia not fulfill it, right? Firstly, what is the purpose of art, right? I think this is the fundamental question that OO completely neglects, because they talk to you about how it's just pure enjoyment or how you feel good when you listen to the Beatles or something, right? Number one, right? We think that the purpose of art isn't solely about how many brushstrokes there are or how long the film is, right? It's about the context and about the emotions that it evokes in that specific context, right? More importantly, right, I think a lot of proponents of art theory argue that art isn't valuable in and of itself, right? It's about the context that it's placed in and the situation that you're able to judge it by. It's also about the political context, the socio-economic context in which you perceive it, right? So for example, right, we think that the reason why old movies in the past about say Total Recall was specifically unique in that particular point in time in the 70s, and why it was so popular is because people were able to relate to the kind of technological advancement that Total Recall pushed for, right? About the kind of utopia that you can discover in other worlds, right? The reason why this kind of art is meaningful to people is because the context that they appreciate it, that they use to appreciate it, is unique to that piece of art, right? We think that at the point in which that context has changed, that piece of art and its fundamental purpose has changed as well. So why did aesthetic nostalgia not fulfill the true purpose of art, right? I think that aesthetic nostalgia tries to dig up things from the past to insert them into the present. But given that the present is not the past, right, the context in which you interpret it, the feelings that you get are completely different, right? So for example, right, if you're 5 years old and you watch the first Star Wars movie, the feelings that you get are of wonder and stuff like that. But now it just feels a little bit old and a little bit reused, right? So we think that oftentimes the feelings that evoke are completely different based on the context, right? But more importantly, we think that regardless of the context in which this art is interpreted in, right, we think that aesthetic nostalgia just objectively creates worse art that just doesn't evoke the full extent of feelings that it should in people, right? Firstly, right, we think that when people like things, oftentimes they hype it up in their heads, right? So for example, if you really like something in the past, you hype it up in your head, right? Because you always hold it close to your memories, you tie it to the past or the good experiences that he talks about in his first legal speech, right? But more importantly, I think this means that oftentimes the remakes are never going to be as good as you remember, right? Because you hype it up in your head, and it's inherent inherent and its value is just like maximized in your head as compared to when it was like on paper or on the screen, right? This means therefore that whenever you try to dig up like old forms of art, you try to remake it, oftentimes it just never lives up to the hype. We give you the examples of King Kong movies, right? People in the past thought that remaking it would give you things like technological progress, like clearer screen, better audio. What they actually got was shittier CGI, like the King Kong just going around like knocking small towers. It was very unimpressive in people's heads, right? Oftentimes the feelings that evoked just aren't the same as what the creator intended all those years ago, right? Let's talk about this final idea that they bring up. It's like their speech about like problematic forms of art and about old tropes, right? They tell you that you need problematic art that like originates from like say like racist stereotypes because it gives contrast to the kind of progress that like our world has like right now, right? We think that number one, like museums exist for a reason, right? This contrast will always exist insofar as old art forms exist too. What we are not fine here with is that like we are not fine with you like digging up old pieces of art and glorifying it, right? Because oftentimes aesthetic nostalgia comes hand in hand with you saying that that piece of art was objectively good and that was like fine even if it promoted like problematic ideals, right? We think it's not fine that people continue to look at scenes of like Native Americans being slaughtered and saying that has inherent value as an art form because sure, maybe it might contrast with the fact that we've had like some progress in society today, but I don't think it's fair that you continue to capitalize on like old tropes that just have no meaning today and are effectively like just like objectively wrong in today's day and age, right? But more importantly, like we talk about the crowding out effect, right? We think that oftentimes aesthetic nostalgia just means that newer, better emerging forms of art just never take place, right? So for example, right, there's a rise in art using like lasers and stuff like that, right? People are like typically like interested in more like technologically advanced pieces of art. But because you have things that tap on collective memory, you tap on things like from the 70s, oftentimes these like become like a bigger thing in the media because everyone is more or less able to relate to it. What this means therefore is that emerging forms of art that may technically be better will never really get the airtime and the like screen time that they deserve in people's heads, which just means that new emerging art forms will never exist in their world. But more importantly, right, this whole idea about how you use art to access culture and therefore you need to tap on like old like common like cultural practices to like increase diversity in the world. The first thing we want to say is that this is not a debate about using shared cultural practices. We think that you can still talk about shared cultural practices without having to evoke like the past to like build it up and to hype it up in people's head, right? But more importantly, this is a debate that like means that just isn't mutually exclusive. But even if we were to bite the bullet, we think that that is still bad because oftentimes you dilute the impact on the cultural significance of the things you talk about because you always tag it to the past, and that means that it never really gets appreciated for its full value and its fullest extent, right? Second clash, right? Why artistic like aesthetic nostalgia just effectively destroys artistic industries, right? I think this is where they never really gave our argument full credit or tried to deal with the full extent of our argument. We told you that firstly, aesthetic nostalgia guides the way in which people create art because they know that maximizing profit means that they have to default to what is most convenient and what people are most likely to be very receptive to, right? So they try to produce art that is marketed towards the past and people's like general nostalgia for the past, right? This means that it influences like two main things, right? Firstly, about the medium in which that kind of art is propagated. People are unwilling to experiment with slightly more risky mediums that may not necessarily sit so well with people because they don't have prior experience with it. This also means that people are unwilling to take risks with their storyline. That's why you see Hollywood movies just churning out tons and tons of the same things that send no like particularly different message because they aren't willing to take a risk with a different storyline that hasn't already been a box office hit, right? But more importantly, does all art have the same value, right? Because I think the premise of OO's case is that all art has value regardless of whether or not it's old or like whether or not it like looks good and stuff like that, right? I think it's just untrue. We told you that art is about the context. Art is about whether or not it guides like future like better art being produced, and insofar as theirs is a world that continues to constrain all of this kind of art and like artistic industries in general, we're so proud to propose. Go with Koji.
I want to have a chat about three things in this speech. First, I want to talk about artistic creation. Second, I want to talk about artistic enjoyment. And lastly, I want to talk about artistic preservation. First, about artistic creation. So, I think the very first thing we need to understand, and this entire debate needs to understand, is that art is not something like medical advancements or science and technology, where we need to push human boundaries all the time. Why is that the case? The reason why is because the more you try to push human boundaries, the harder it is for people to understand them. And at the end of the day, art is something that needs to be enjoyed, and art needs to be something that is accessible. The problem is we're often trying to be more interesting. You make art harder to access. So what's an example of this? When the recent artists who made like a lot of drama tried to place a banana on the wall, it was so abstract that no one could understand and interpret that form of art. And that's where art becomes problematic because it's something that's highbrow, it's something that's elite, it's something that you can only access it if you have the abstract ability to understand it. So I think the first thing to understand is that inspiration and artistic creation is not an a priori good thing in this debate. And that is why, for that reason alone, OG is out of the debate. Because art is about the enjoyment of it. The second thing I want to do in this is compare what exactly the process of not having artistic, so if in a world without aesthetic nostalgia, how will art be motivated by? And we posit in the opening opposition that art will therefore be driven by financial incentives and financial incentives only. There are two harms of this. The first is that if art is not grounded by something that's bigger than yourself and bigger than civilization, then it's going to be grounded and driven primarily by money. And that's where the rise of Hollywood, the rise of whitewashing becomes a lot more prevalent. Because these are the demographics of people that holds the most amount of money and controls the way artistic direction evolves. That is where I think the harms of opening government becomes a lot more pronounced. Because the harms there is that if it's driven primarily by financial incentives, people like the poor will never have their art actually celebrated. People who are oppressed, like the Xinjiang Uyghurs, will never have their art in museums because it's primarily driven by financial incentives. The counterfactor in the comparative is that if you are driven by a larger belief of ourselves, of what is present, and a larger idea of civilization, a larger idea of humanity, that is where all the other forms of human experiences get some sort of representation as compared to the counterfactor on the other side, which does not exist. Closing.
The comparative you're trying to force on this debate is bizarre. Because the nostalgia because the financial problems the financial incentive that you're talking about is structurally to be nostalgic on that side, on both sides of the house, insofar as it's often conservative individuals. Insofar as we regret aesthetic nostalgia, why must we defend the world where art is very easy?
So no, I don't think so, because artistic nostalgia is trying to talk about classical works like Shakespeare in a time where money did not drive art. I think it's going to be a lot worse on your side because it's all about the abstractness of art, about how much art can sell. Then I think it's going to be far worse on the counterfactual on your side. So first, I've proven to you that artistic creation is not a priori good thing. But even if it is, I think it's going to be far worse when financial incentives are going to make it a lot worse on their side. Second, I want to talk about artistic enjoyment. And here's where I want to start engaging with possible arguments coming up with closing government. Where they're likely to say, oh, but we need to push the boundaries of art so that we are able to see and enjoy more higher orders of art. I think there are two problems here. The first, and the thing that opening government concedes, is that an idea of artistic nostalgia taps on your idea of what collective memory of what humanity is. I think that's where art is able to appeal to the lowest common denominator because a lot more people are able to enjoy it. So even on the metric of strict utility, I think their argument of collective memory works against them because more people are able to enjoy art on our side of the house where we tap on a collective idea of what humanity is as compared to their side, which is trying to push artistic boundaries, and it becomes extremely hard to interpret what these arts actually are. And that's where the point that I've explained earlier about highbrow art becomes extremely important as well. Where I think on their side of the house, highbrow art is going to be way more alienating on their side because a lot less people are able to enjoy it because of how it's trying to push human boundaries all the time. The third thing I want to beyond that, I think we also have to understand that art and the enjoyment of art is not only about like what is impressive. Art can also be about understanding. The reason why art is something that's celebrated is because it is a demonstration and illustration of the human experience that we as individuals can collectively enjoy. And that's where we think like the aesthetic nostalgia becomes important. Because artistic nostalgia is tapping on history and what the human experience is from the past as well, which I think is a lot more easily enjoyable by people because it's something that's so accessible. Like it is about human experience of Shakespeare that was what happened 300 years ago, and these struggles of being poor or being discriminated against us, common experiences of humanity that we still experience today, that I think is going to be way more enjoyable on our side. The third frame I'm going to bring into this debate, and I think this is going to be what wins opening opposition debate as well, It's about how we preserve art way back. So the argument coming for opening government here is that there will be a lot of stereotyping. Not true. Artistic nostalgia is literally the last bastion of cultural existence of a lot of people. The reason why we oftentimes call things cultural classics is because these were the remnants and the roots of where culture came from. That is where a lot of cultures, like the Chinese culture, talks about the imperial times, about dressing up and paying respects to the king. Because these were part of the history of their culture that was important. And at the point where you do not and are not nostalgic about these forms of art is, I think, where you whitewash a huge portion of collective cultural memory that are important to people. You make it way easier to whitewash or in fact erase parts of Xinjiang's history at the point where cultural nostalgia is no longer a thing. Because you can then deny the existence of their cultural roots altogether. I think that is where whitewashing becomes way and far worse on the other side of the house. The counterfactual on our side is that with a collective memory and collective nostalgia allows us to tap on this cultural humanity that is part of us and allows these cultures to continually evolve and gives human beings who are living in a globalized world some sort of belonging. For these reasons, I'm proud to
I think this debate sadly has been too largely centric around artists and artistic expression, but not of what the outcomes of artists or the outcomes of the artists, what artists want to achieve. Right? We think art is just not only about expression, right? It's about direction, it's about showcasing what you aspire society to be. It's by galvanizing individuals around art so that they can question what society is and what it should be. I think the crutches of the past are often that restrict artists to fully actualize this future because we are thinking too hard on this past. What I'm going to talk to you about in my speech and how do we differ from the opening government. I think opening government largely was centered on this notion that artistic expression is restrictive and this is a bad thing. What we think this debate should be about is that why is it important for humans or individuals to be forward-looking? That is, why not having these crutches or these crutches in and of itself is a better thing for humanity in order to change the way society functions or galvanizes around art and how we can conceptualize society in a manner that is beneficial and better for everyone, that is not driven from the past. Because past is often a bad driver of the future. I'll talk to you about a few things. First, why is it so easy to cling on to past memories and why is that a bad thing? And secondly, why is it important to be future looking? I think a lot of their materials will be clash over there and will be made irrelevant at the end of the day. We think inherent in the human experience is by holding memories, right? That knowing what you have experienced and the memories that you have created for them is very easy to ponder upon. That is, you can often select what makes you happy and what doesn't. The difference of the future is this. You're often afraid of the unknown. That is, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what may happen, and that often is a scary thought. That's why pondering on the past or knowing that the past was there makes you happy, makes you smile, because you think it's a better, more comfortable place because it's more familiar to you. We think that's problematic, right? Because it often, one, glorifies this notion that the past was a good thing, or the past is a good thing. And we don't think that's necessarily always the case. But at the same time, it also extricates the present and the future of being good. That is, no matter how good the present is, the past was better. The past will always be better. And these are the kind of notions that often tie humanity in a pessimistic cycle of when they cannot be future thinking. Because the point at which you're willing to buy that the past was the be-all end-all of our existence, there's no way we can have a more optimistic and forward-looking humanity in the way we can conceptualize our future. And we think that inherently problematic. So why is it important to be future-looking and aspirational? I think we as a society have always been aspirational. whether it be through science, tech, or art. Because Peisong says that unlike science and tech, art does not break ground. I would like to contest that notion. Art breaks grounds on more emotional and more like intangible ways. That is, it makes you feel in ways that science cannot, right? It makes you feel aggravated about society, about things that actually exist. And when you use the crutches of the past, that is, use the framework that has already been there, use the framework that has already been used in the past to establish the future, that is exactly when you restrict the art, the extent to which you can have this discussion, right? What does this look like? We think this often also ties into the function of art, because this has been a very narrow conception though, because the function of art in their side has only been about like artistic expression. We think it's more about galvanizing individuals towards an issue. It's about allowing them to see issues in a more broad, I'll take in a moment, in a more broad manner that is not restricted from the crutches. I'll elaborate more on that, but go ahead, yeah.
Your impacts sound very persuasive, but can you first prove the premise that aesthetic nostalgia as it is practiced today actually squashes like most expression of new art?
Oh yeah, so the idea is, right, it's, understand this, that at the point in which you as an artist, or your incentives, or your ideas, or your notions are often driven by this idea that the past is something that is glorified, the past is easy to fall back on, you often use that as a crutch to justify your modern art. And that art cannot guide the future. Because we think that the future, or the way the future should be thought out in humanity is something that should not be done with the crutches of the past. What does that look like? We think that we as a society have some control over how we want to conceptualize the future. But the issue is the past has been problematic for the greatest extent. And using the past as a crutch to conceptualize the future will inevitably have a turnover effect that impacts the future in a manner that is not good for society. We think that in just the whole notion of having a crutch to fall back on, or this sense of familiarity that you can often expound on, often limits the extent to which the artist can be like, I don't know, like abrasive, or like challenging the notion of society. Because like Adil earlier pointed out, if artists often create on what has already been created, like the example of a tree, you're just building more branches to something that has already been established, rather than not conceptualizing something new, or a new field, or a new tree in the field. We think this whole notion of you relying on the past rules of what has been done is something that often restricts future building. Then why is future building so important? We think future building is important in the sense of humanity, because humanity is a long way to go. We think in terms of construction, in terms of idealizing the future, in terms of improvement, we have a long way to go. And this improvement can only happen insofar we're not stopped by the crutches of the past art. What does that look like? Recognizing this, that opening already talked about it, so I don't want to spend much time on it. The past art was often very oppressive in nature. It often functioned in a manner that came at like making fun of other individuals, whether it be like past comedies or slapstick and made fun of gay people, or whether it be like any kind of comedy that is still softly like resembling the past, where making fun of homosexuality is acceptable in comedy. We think this will always be the case when aesthetic nostalgia is there, because slapstick comedy is so ingrained in our head. We cannot conceptualize a new meaning of comedy or a new meaning of being humorous insofar that that idea is so prevalent in the common norm. And we think that pressing notion in and of itself often restricts artistic notion, and this artistic notion often restricts the way we can drive in the future, because insofar we are fine with people making jokes in comedy clubs of homosexuality, we can never completely eradicate it out of our own mentality and our future society that we build on what is and isn't acceptable. And I think this is what at its core aesthetic nostalgia is about, right? Like you holding something that was like you first of all fetishizing your past because you think that's a safe zone, but at the same time you using that to forward society in a manner that is often not good, or often not the best society will prosper. And if the function of art or artists is not always capitalistic, but often at times to change society, often at times to galvanize individuals, we think the best way they can do it, the best way they can actually bring about social change in the way society will function, in what direction society will go, is by completely extricating this notion of like nostalgia. Yeah, this nostalgia. I think like just from a generic perspective, right? Just think about it from an open perspective. So many of our notions are defined by how we have seen things in the past. Like, so many of our ideals are because of past nostalgia, because of nostalgia in itself, not just aesthetics. Aesthetics also define nostalgia. But nostalgia is like being conservative in nature, or like even Brexit is driven by nostalgia, but that's a stretch. But the idea is that nostalgic emotions are something that may and often are problematic in nature. They're often coming at exclusion of a lot of minorities that have already existed, and because humans have been becoming better and more liberal as they progress, we think holding on to this idea of the past often restricts the conception of the future. And that is why I'm so proud to propose.
Member of Government, and now we welcome member of Opposition. Thank you.
Art is history. The ability to remember and capitalize on aesthetic nostalgia allows us to grant an avenue and shine the spotlight on subcultural expressions of art that were categorically denied from governments in the past by majority individuals that did not see value in those expressions of art. That's why when you look at the 80s, where the queer individuals wear skinny jeans, faux leather, and even ostrich leather jackets, those are things that were categorically denied by individuals because those were forms of expression that individuals did not see value in. The first thing I want to respond to both Gov team is whether there's really a limitation of new forms of artistic expression and whether they can genuinely galvanize the artistic movement to be one that's forward-looking. The first thing I want to say is that the film industry is not irrational as the way they claim it to be. And I think that there's a very protective element that exists with the fans who necessarily look at the history of art or the nostalgic versions of art. That is to say, they will always be very critical at the point in time where bad remakes come into play. Individuals decide to boycott those movies and films if they feel that it does not represent the artistic impression or the history that they remember what this art necessarily created it to be. But the second thing I therefore want to respond to as a point of response to its closing government is that there also exists market competition if within the film industry and within the artistic industry, there is a certain cap to the number of art replication that you can have with regards to historical or nostalgic art forms, and that at a certain point in time, where if the film industry and artistic industry wants to differentiate itself from the competitor, there's no ability for them to hold on to the market share of aesthetic nostalgia, especially when bigger, larger corporations, especially like the Hollywood industry, is already capitalizing on it. That's why you see a lot of indie filmmakers, smaller indie film theaters, within the projector, for instance, showing films that were a bit more future forward looking, and it's not one that only replicates the aesthetic nostalgia they talk about. So I think this gov bench is out. I therefore want to extend coming up from closing opposition. And I'll talk about why aesthetic nostalgia creates more innovative and meaningful version of art. Because if you really listen to opening opposition's analysis regarding this, all they claim is that there is value in revisiting history when it comes to the creation of new and innovative art, but does not actually give you any reasons as to why revisiting history in and of itself is significantly important in the way to which we shine the spotlight on subcultural expression of art that's uniquely important in the way to which we bring individuals together. But not only that, is the cross-pollination of art across borders, when even American film industry now saw relevance and the importance of the Japanese industry and the film industry in one that was uniquely powerful in creating art forms. That's where closing opposition is going to extend it. But the second thing that we therefore extend would also talk about why artistic landscapes are not just abstract in nature, but they're also physical spaces that communities gather around, and the act of regretting aesthetic nostalgia is the active erasure of these spaces of art communities that individuals belong. I think that's abhorrent under the side of government bench. So the first part of my speech, therefore, I'll talk about why, on a simple premise, that art is often steeped in socio-cultural context of that particular time frame. Artistic movements will form a cultural identity markers that individuals hold on to. 80s fashion culture pioneered by queer individuals, as I earlier claimed, such as the rise of the skinny jeans that individuals want to wear. Socio-cultural context that's reflected through these aesthetic nostalgia achieves a couple of things. The first thing I want to say is that you get to revisit the historical understanding as to what their artistic movement looks like, and we think this is significantly important because you're able to understand or gain a greater appreciation of those art forms that you otherwise would not have had gotten under the side of government bench. But the second thing I also want to say is that aesthetic nostalgia, as you look at it right now, often capitalizes on subcultures that are easily lost in history or even perhaps seen as improper and inappropriate under the government bench. Aesthetic nostalgia therefore grants an avenue for the discussion of those subcultural contexts that are often invisible, ignored, or even oppressed by the majority. If you look at, the artistic industry, therefore, or in terms of fashion trends, we are able to capitalize on old fashion trends that were pioneered by varying subcultures. So if you look at the goth or the heavy metal subculture within the United States, which was an expression of rebellion against a government that actively robbed away their rights and shut them down, I think the expression or the revival of heavy metal, even within the status quo, is things that are important in the way in which we understand how history has evolved within America. These are important points of history that you cannot absolutely remove under the side of government bench, and the closing opposition gets this. But even in music, right? Modern hip-hop artists highlights forgotten jazz artists that were oppressed during that particular time frame. These are things of oppression that you will never get under the side of government bench the moment you regret aesthetic nostalgia from coming about. Aesthetic nostalgia art, therefore, is a tool to which subcultures are now able to get the appreciation that they never once had gotten, individuals from this group actually realizes how important that subculture of theirs, in terms of the identity expression, gets some form of relevance. But two films, Star Wars was inspired by Akira somebody film Rashomon, right? That means, right, Hollywood industry now started seeing the relevance and the importance of the Japanese film industry that was always seen as inappropriate by the Western industry that did not see any value in it. What exactly are the various impacts that we therefore can? One, we allow for a greater cross-pollination of creative licensing or creative ideas between borders and between countries in the way in which they capitalize on aesthetic nostalgia from different groups of individuals. Two, we also allow the newer generation of people to experience the same kind of sentiments and feelings that the older generation can get through aesthetic nostalgia. And we think this is a good in and of itself when individuals are able to draw points of commonality with the older generation that's increasingly more separate and diverse from this younger generation. Three, we would also suggest that it also oftentimes pioneer lots of innovation in the status quo. The fact that the film space odyssey gives you a very lucid imagination of what a world filled with artificial intelligence looks like. You see a lot of companies necessarily embodying this. When we weighed this out of this opening opposition, we told you the impact of why diversity is important and why aesthetic nostalgia actively allow individuals to highlight these subcultures. But the second thing, therefore, is that artistic landscapes are just not abstract in nature, but also physical in its manifestations. So when we look at physical art spaces, the fact that Bugis Street historically was not as sterile as it looked like today. It was a street that allowed for exotic performances, allowed for queer expression, allowed for drag queens to show who they were. But as a consequence of regretting aesthetic nostalgia, the Bugis Street was wiped out in terms of that historical ability for communities to congregate, for ability for these communities to talk about their own subcultural experiences and share those feelings. We would suggest the regretting of aesthetic nostalgia necessarily denies these artistic landscapes from even existing to begin with in its physical manifestation, and we think this is significantly harmful. What you heard at closing opposition is that if art is history, we revisit the history of individuals that have been for far too long forgotten in society. Closing opposition.
The next member of opposition, and I will welcome Governor Taylor.
It was one moment as I feel.
The first thing I want to ask is what this debate is about. I want to carve out a chunk of this debate. Because this debate can't just be about enjoyment for a whole reason. One, I think it's a bit lame that art in general is about I don't know, release a few endorphins in your brain. Then you feel happy for a while, you feel I don't know, woke, right? The reality is, I think, it's about, the core of this debate has to be about how we improve people's lives. I think art has the capability to do that. It has the ability to spark change, it has the ability to change the way individuals think about the world, think about people within that world, and that's what I think we propose. But here I also want to point out that peisong just doesn't make sense when he's talking about enjoyment for two reasons. One, he actually does what Adil says they don't want to do, which is debate examples as to whether it's good or bad, enjoyment or no enjoyment. But second and more importantly, when he talks about financial incentive, this already clashes against his argument that says that there's a low enjoyment because presumably financial incentive will move towards where demand is. So even on those grounds, I think doesn't make sense. I think what happens when artists put pen to paper or brush to canvas or whatever is that they want to create a legacy. The unique thing about an artist is that everything that they do is something that lives on well beyond the point that they died. That is why, for example, when people like Amy Winehouse died, the point is that she leaves a legacy in the music that she gives and the fact that she tries to tell us a story of what she thinks the world is about and what she thinks we could be. The difference on that, the problem on that side of the house is therefore that insofar as they've hurt the ability to achieve this kind of social change, achieve this kind of legacies with pure nostalgia within their artworks, I think they lose this debate. This is where I want to enter the comparative, because Jan says much of a comparative you talk to, right? The comparative that we set out here is that side fundamentally is predominantly backward art vis-a-vis our art, which we think is likely to be aspirational in nature. The first thing I'll do here is take out this idea of financial things in OO, right? Peisong tries to push. The problem is, we live in a world where indie art has Farhan already points out, is increasingly popular. That's a word which I don't understand why you need massive financial backing in order for your art to actually be successful. That's them out. Why is it likely to be the case that they are predominantly backward? I want to point out that they're actually incredibly ignorant or misrepresentative of analysis that's kind of already come out in Vedant. One, Vedant tells you that it's likely to be a crutch. Because of the perception that this is the way art is, and therefore artists are likely to turn towards it. But secondly, because this is likely to be safely accepted by society, right? The fact that aesthetic nostalgia is a concept in society just means that it's likely that people want to push out this kind of artwork, because this is artwork that is safe and therefore is necessarily going to have demand and ensure that artists are not starving people by the street as you characterize them to be. But third, because I think people talk about it more, right? Because they believe that they have nostalgia and they preference these artworks, that naturally means that you normalize the notion that this is like. And therefore, even if there is non-nostalgic art, we just talk about non-nostalgic art less than we talk about nostalgic art in the status quo. That directly deals with fast art analysis on market competition, right? Because the reality is that even with this competition, the majority of demand supports this particular form of artwork, then I think that's I likely to have the backward art that we talk about. So that's the world that they have to defend and they haven't defended thus far. Why do we think we get aspirational artwork on our side? The reason for this is that I think we, like, as humans, we necessarily take our reference from either looking forward or looking backward or looking forward in life. Either aspirationally thinking of what the life could be, or thinking of what life used to be. Presumably, our world accepts that this is something that's a good thing, insofar as looking forward is concerned. But I want to note here, no thank you, that it cannot be that at the point that we choose to be aspirational in our artwork, and we choose to have our artwork feature what we think the world could be, rather than what the world was. It cannot be the case that this means we lose all frame of reference of our past in society as far as extension requires you to believe, right? And the reason for that is we still study the past, we still see past works, because presumably that is where some degree of inspiration is likely to come from. The difference is why we need to create new art in order to achieve any of these benefits. Why this new art that we create has to necessarily look like the old forms of art, be retro in nature, is an argument that they haven't responded to. And that incidentally deals with this subculture argument, right? Because note that within all the big words that he uses, there's no actual analysis to why heavy metal must come back in order for us to relook history. Literally no analysis in that speech. I think it's a bit late in Subra. That's why I think the frame of this debate is ultimately about whether we want to be aspirational in art, and we can be aspirational while not completely removing the past as far as extension requires to believe. To that degree, how do we achieve social change? This is where the extension from Vedant actually gets very, very little analysis in Farhan's speech. There are two extensions. The first thing he tells you is that it's fundamentally bad to get change by analyzing history, vis-a-vis the comparative of getting change via aspirational artwork. Why is it bad to analyze history? This directly clashes with the last minute of Adil's speech, where he says we needed to discuss. Look, the problem is that, insofar as many forms of history are presented within aesthetically nostalgic artworks, the problem on that side of the house is that this naturally get litigated in each new artwork that you create. Because history is not something that's set in stone, right? It is something that people necessarily disagree with on both sides of the house. The problem on that side is that when artwork is necessarily nostalgic, you lose the ability to have social change because your change is premised on the litigation of the past before you can move into the present. The past is uniquely hard to analyze for reasons that Vedant gives you. He tells you that things like emotion are involved in the past. Because artwork necessarily gives you one person's perspective, and that perspective might not be reflective of the emotions that people have experienced within the past. But the second important thing he tells you is that talking about the past necessarily carries immense amounts of emotional and historical baggage. Talking about slavery, for instance, or talking about the history of black-white relations in the United States, that carries guilt for white individuals. That carries honor for black individuals who feel that they were disenfranchised in the past. These are things that you're just unable to litigate fairly on that side of the house, and that limits your ability to achieve the social change that you want to achieve as an artist. The comparative we gave you was aspirational hard art. We told you that things like hope are far better things to bind around, because we are used to coming around and talking about the future. The future is something that we can all share in our conceptualization of. We can all think about what it is. We can create a future that is able to include all of us without the baggage of history. That's why he said that if you want to create change in art, we need to break apart aesthetic nostalgia. We need to be able to have national narratives that bind us together and look at the future. That's why, for example, states that emphasize the future that they want, rather than the way in which they broke out from colonial history and decolonization, tend to be more United States moving forward, because they're able to create their narrative from scratch and be free from the shackles of the histories and baggage that your history carries. That's why we thought that if it was about social
social change, we won't. But the second thing we say is that making art purely about the past is just fundamentally depressing. And this deals with Orwell's idea that like it's good because art is like you get to see things in the past with nostalgic art, right? They say we want to protect minorities. I think the comparative for minorities is at the point that we tell minorities to dream what the future could be, rather than think about the past where it's better but you can never get back to. I think that's a better world for these minorities regardless. Closing, I wanted to argue about Bugis Street. This argument is literally, places change and that is bad. The reality on both sides of the house is that insofar as there's any relevance to this because people still exist, we are going to be able to have this artwork on our side as well. We are very, very happy to propose.
As a somewhat living embodiment of this motion, I'm rather disappointed that CG decided to like misrepresent us rather than actually engage the argument that Farhan made. I think it's a bit disappointing. I want to talk about two things. One, I want to talk about the variable impact of aesthetic nostalgia, which I think directly clashes with CG. Secondly, I want to talk about originality, which I think clashes with OG and CG and the government in general. One, all the variable impact of aesthetic nostalgia. I think the main claim that CG makes is generally that like the past is a bad marker to use when charting future events. But I don't think they actually prove this link. Like it's unclear as to why A, it is wrong to chart the future or chart things based on the past, or two, why that is necessarily a bad thing. The claims that they make with regards to this, or to explain this thing, is that the past is a bad driver of the future. I don't think this is necessarily true, right? This is because the art world, as Farhan tells you, for example, is quite broad enough for nostalgic and non-nostalgic art to both exist. For every Mandalorian or Stranger Things, for example, you have TV shows like The Wire, Mad Men, or Breaking Bad, for example. I think even if we accept on outside the house that perhaps more conversations will become about nostalgic art versus non-nostalgic art, I think there's some value in nostalgia as well. The only claim towards this, right, as a response that they tell us, is that you may like invoke like racist art as well, because like you may invoke like bad versions of cultural nostalgia. I don't think anyone is like nostalgic for say slavery or like says like, man, I really miss the times where I could like be openly racist towards minorities. But secondly, it's less likely that bad parts of cultural nostalgia or bad parts of the past are used as an inspiration, because today's society, which is different from the past, which is something that they admit, is more likely to reject those kinds of things. So I think it's unlikely that you have like bad versions of cultural nostalgia that are gotten on outside the house, because the society sort of adjudicates as to whether that representation of cultural nostalgia that's created today is something that's uniquely influential or uniquely inspirational for the society that we live in today. Next thing, I think shelving the past sometimes ignores the influence of the past, and I think that's kind of sad, right? The only response that Shaun had to this was, oh, Farhan said Bugis Street changed, therefore like it's a bad thing. But that's not what Farhan was saying, right? He was talking about things such as gentrification and sterilization of architecture in cities like Singapore, for example, which means that where societies, for example, prioritize trying to create new aesthetic versions of the future, as opposed to recognizing that the past also has cultural significance, for example. So you often ignore or blind like the cultural aspects or the aesthetic notions of like Malay culture in certain places in Singapore, for example, and it also ignores the past subcultures who used to live there. For example, their only response to this is, oh, people read about them in history textbooks, but I don't think that's a valid response. Insofar as art or conversations around art are had more on like layman terms by the average person and not necessarily like prioritized by academic conversations, I think it's more likely that we need cultural landscapes to be reflective of what we were like in the past, so that more people in the future are more likely to actually read up about those things. Because it's easier to tell a kid, for example, to look up the history of jazz music to figure out why slavery was something that jazz artists wrote about, as opposed to telling him to read a textbook about slavery and figure out those things for himself. I think it's more likely on outside the house that people actually become more socially aware of the past versus their side of the house. No thank you. Next thing that they say, they also say that legacies need to be created, and therefore you inhibit legacies the moment you have cultural nostalgia.
I think it's more true for legacies on outside the house, right? Legacies of the past are more likely to be forgotten when you hide them and you carve them out of reference from like current times, right? That's why people like Amy Winehouse that they give as an example is more likely to be forgotten by your side of the house, and others on their side also do not have the ability to be researched in the future as well. Even if the claim of their best version is true, like that, like you have forward-looking up on their side of the house, or like a film or piece of music, for example, people in the future are less likely to reuse those types of arts for cultural nostalgia in the future, for example. So your work is going to be more and more forgotten the more time goes on their side of the house. So even if forward-thinking art is created, it's never revived in the future. Therefore, legacies are more likely to be lost on your side of the house, especially culturally important ones. The next thing that I want to talk about, right, is that, like, okay, I talked about this already. Okay, let me move on to like the second issue, right, on originality. The stuff that I think OG and CG sort of says it, like the problem with cultural nostalgia is that it tries too hard to recreate the past, and therefore like taking aspirations from the past is a bad thing. This may be fair, but I think the protective nature of aesthetic nostalgia, the people surrounding aesthetic nostalgia, works in our favor to make good art. Why is this the case? Bad versions of aesthetic nostalgia often are seen as things such as money grabs, or often criticized for not paying proper homage to the original art, for example. That's why remakes like Ghostbusters or like Saw films are seen as bad things, for example, or things that like are not like good representations of what we should aspire to. Like, I think that different kinds of art or bad kinds of art often get discarded by the zeitgeist anyway. So I think even if the claims that bad art is created, I think good versions of cultural nostalgia are the ones that people are going to remember as opposed to bad ones. I think that's value as well. I think on outside the house, even if we accept the worst case, we'd rather have some sort of aesthetic nostalgia which could borrow elements from the past but also create something that's original as well. I think for example, people like Quentin Tarantino excels at this, right? Using spaghetti western medium, which was historically reductive in its portrayal of Native Americans, and subverting it by using it to create a slave story of an African American, for example, fighting for its freedom, is our ways in which taking inspiration from the past can be used in meaningful and imaginative ways as well. I think this is also indicative of the stuff that Farhan tells you, right? Films like A Space Odyssey, for example, crafting an idea of what an advanced spacecraft would look like is also good, and also deals with the forward-thinking stuff that CG talks about, because a lot of tech companies, for example, base a lot of their designs or design thinking things based on inspirations that they take from the past, for example. I think that even notions like Siri, for example, were copied or robbed off of like a lot of sci-fi films, a lot of novels that were written in the past, such as like H.G. Wells' 50,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Therefore, I think there's a lot of innovation that happens when you use cultural nostalgia as something that's important. I think this is close towards the extension that Farhan talks about in the first half of his speech, right? I think past art can be imaginative enough because it's about crafting an inspiration for us and exists as cultural landmarks. The reason why Farhan starts off his speech by telling you that art is about history is because it's only by remembering the weight, like the weight of our forefathers or the people who created art in the past is a way in which we can be inspired by those things to create better forms of art in the future. It crafts an inspiration that enables the present and future artists to use nostalgia in a meaningful way to create more, like to transform artistic boundaries and also to create products that are more meaningful today. I think it can also be beautiful to have people from the past or like icons from the past, for example, be brought about by artists in the present, right? So like bringing about jazz artists like say like B.B. King or Quincy Jones is something that like contemporary rappers may do, and we think that's a good thing insofar as highlights those forgotten artists who weren't relevant at that point in time because it was not considered cool to listen to that type of music. For example, I think this enables art to be revisited in meaningful ways, not just in forms of pure nostalgia. I wish I could just listen to 80s music all the time, but also because of artists today who put their own spin on what like 80s music is and create new forms of those kinds of things as well. I think at the end of the day, I think we take this debate because one, it explains the true impacts of cultural nostalgia. Secondly, on why it's so important to retain as relics of the past, even if like that means looking towards the past. I think we take this debate.